Almost 25 years ago, Hyundai Motors entered the Indian market on the back of the humble Santro mass mobilizer designed to take on the Maruti 800. Today, it's the second largest car maker in the country, having established its dominance over multiple segments but remaining at its heart a big mass market car brand. Who would have thought then that it would all culminate in this? It's called the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and it is Hyundai's all-new electric car flagship. Of course, it also costs 45.95 lakh ex-showroom, making it the most expensive Hyundai to be sold in the country. And it's also booked out pretty much, the first batch at least. Why? Well, there are plenty of reasons. First is the way this car looks. Now, Hyundai has dabbled in luxury cars before, but it's never been quite at this scale, and it's never been quite so bold and irreverent. In fact, a few years ago, you wouldn't mistake this for a concept, and something that looks like this would be considered too radical and too unrealistic for a production model. And yet here we are with what is easily one of the most striking cars of modern times and one of the best looking hatchbacks ever to exist. The Ioniq 5 is a striking looking machine, taking cues from the clean-cut retro hatchbacks of the 80s with its pixel-shaped LED headlamps, wind tunnel sculpted rear wing. It's a sort of car that stands out in a crowd. But its significance is greater because of what's underneath its future-proof design. A large battery, a born electric modular platform, and a fairly extensive list of features. Now, inside things are even more special. In fact, it's kind of hard to believe that I'm sitting inside a Hyundai because there's no immediate telltale sign. It's such a grand departure from what they've been making. Now, of course, that isn't to say Hyundai has not had grand designs. Some of their cars of late have really looked good. But this feels like we're another territory altogether. And I guess that's kind of the idea with this car. Hyundai wants to take a massive evolutionary leap into a very, very premium end, especially with its EVs, where it hopes to become a market leader, especially when it comes to these high-end, high-range luxury EVs. And well, here, of course, there is this massive cavity which creates an even greater sense of space. You don't have any central touchpad, you don't have a transmission tunnel of any sort going, running across the center of the car. And that creates just a lot of space, essentially. You've got a lot of cargo space here, and it's got this very clean white palette, which I reckon will be a little hard to maintain because I can already see some marks here and there. They've also incorporated a lot of eco-friendly materials, so you've got this paperette sort of finish here, you've got vegan leather, even some of the colors have been extracted from natural sources like sunflower petals and whatnot. It really does feel like a step into the future, but in the right way. It's not opulent, it's not ostentatious, it is understated, it's very clean, it's extremely quiet in here. But just from what I can see so far, you've got drive modes, you've got an 8-speaker Bose sound system, you've got even something called a vehicle to load feature, which is actually not there in a lot of more expensive EVs at the time. Comes with a 16 amp socket that's located under the seat. And what it allows you to do is charge household electronic items. Now you've got this twin screen setup with two 12.3-inch digital instrument screen and a central infotainment screen. You've got multiple drive modes, so there's eco, normal and sport. This is over 72 kilowatt hour battery, so you've got plenty of power to deal with. But it's really the smaller features inside that really set the interiors apart from even far more expensive EVs. Chief of them is the vehicle to load feature, which essentially turns this into a power generator of sorts. Let's say you've gone camping and there is plenty of space, storage space, so you kind of can take it out. You have really high ground clearance. And in those remote locations, it can actually power a fair number of your household electronic devices. There is a limit, of course, of 3.2 kilowatt, but up to that, you're free to just plug in a 16 amp socket, and you can utilize this, and it turns into a power generator. I don't know how many people will do that, given that range anxiety is still a concern, but it's really nifty feature to have, especially on a day-to-day basis. You don't really have to, if you can charge your car at home or at work, then you're free to utilize these features as much as possible, and it's a really cool thing to have. You've got these really cool aluminum knobs, which really feel high quality, and again, it's scarcely believable that this is a production ready car, because a lot of these elements are things we've wanted to see in a lot of cars, but we only saw them limited to a concept, and then when the production model came about, everything was drab and sort of mass market and mass production ready. So it's really a refreshing change. It's also one of the big reasons this car is sold out in big numbers. Hyundai had brought in 500 numbers initially. This is being brought in via the semi-knockdown route. They have a separate assembly line set up just for this car, but they've already received over 650 orders for this car, which has an almost sub 50 lakh price tag. So clearly there is a big demand for luxury electrics, and people are willing to accept brands which have catered to a very different clientele. They're willing to see what they have to offer, as am I. So the next order of business is to see how this car drives. It's also DC fast charging enabled, so it can take up to 350 kilowatt of fast charging. An 11 kilowatt fast charger, which will be thrown in as an early bird incentive, will get it fully charged under 7 hours. But as interesting as it is to behold, the real proof of how far Hyundai has come as a brand lies in how this car drives. Silent, stealthy and swift. Right, so here are the basics. The India version gets a rear wheel drive setup, so you've got a single motor which is mounted on the rear axle, a 72.6 kilowatt hour battery, which is pretty sizable. The same thing that you find in the EV6, pretty much. In fact, this car is based on the same eGMP modular platform that underpins pretty much all the upcoming EVs made by Hyundai and Kia. It's modular, and it's obviously a born electric platform, so there are certain advantages in terms of what kind of battery size it can accommodate, and just how nimble it feels. The big draw for this car, as it is with the EV6, is of course not just the power, which at 270 PS is fairly sufficient, and of course 350 Newton meters of torque, which is quite a bit, especially for a Hyundai. But the big draw is, of course, its range. The claimed range is 631 kilometers as per the ARAI figures. Subtract about 30% of that and you come to a real world figure of about sub 500, which immediately qualifies this as a highway capable EV. So you don't really have to worry about spending all your money, and it costs a fair bit on a car that's just simply going to be a city-based EV. Now you want a bit of performance for a car that costs as much as this does, and in terms of numbers, it seems to suggest that this car can be fairly brisk. The claimed 0 to 100 acceleration figure on this is a little over 6 seconds, and you can switch the driving modes, of which there are 3: normal, eco and sport, using this what looks like an AMG style knob, but is actually just a simple button. But there you go, the graphics change, telling you that it's now prepared to go a little faster, and after that it's pretty much just pretty brisk. Picks up speed fairly quickly. Now international models do get a dual motor all-wheel drive setup, which would obviously be quicker off the mark. It would also add to the cost, so Hyundai hasn't really bothered to bring those to the Indian market just yet, although they say that if demand continues to be as high as it is, then that's something they might consider. So it's certainly not averse to fun, and that rear-wheel drive setup does make it a good bit of fun to throw around if you have a private road. Acceleration isn't absolutely brutal and gut-crushing. That, I suppose, would come with perhaps a dual motor setup. But this car isn't averse to having fun, and in a way that you've not expected Hyundais to before. All Hyundais sold in the country are front-wheel drive, which is an inherently tamer configuration. Now, I'm not suggesting you turn ESC off and traction control, but if you find a private closed road and you've got some charge to spare, with this car is often the case, well, then you might be in for a pleasant surprise. But I think the larger point of this car is just how novel it feels, and even some of the more premium and expensive luxury EVs have not managed to do that the way it does. Yes, you might find it a bit Spartan in terms of its interiors, but I like the fact that you've got this very pristine, minimalistic sort of quality here, which is really nice. And more than anything else, you've got this level of insulation and quiet in here, which is something you can really, really get used to. I like the paperette finish. I like the sort of rough, organic texture on the steering wheel. I like just the overall dashboard layout, the kind of view that I am getting. Everything about this is extremely likable, if maybe a bit hard to maintain. And there are one or two things that can qualify it as such. Yes, the interior space is cavernous. It's a fairly large, very accessible in terms of its space. You just have to press a few buttons to recline or push forward the rear bench as well. It also has 163mm of ground clearance, so you don't really have to worry about potholes or things of such nature. So even if you're slightly off-road, it's not a big problem. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 is a compelling neo-retro vision of Hyundai's future that could very well catapult the brand into a whole new territory of cool. With its rakish good looks and heady mix of performance, practicality, space and safety, the Ioniq 5 is the start of a new chapter for Hyundai's EV journey. And as far as new chapters go, few starting points for brands have ever looked this good and this promising.